Hi guys, I'm going to do some Earth notes with you. So you should have done the pre-quiz already just to see what you kind of already know about worms from your own life experiences. Maybe, you dig them up in the garden or you go fishing with them. So here are your notes. Just follow along with me. If you want to write them down on your own paper, I attached a document for you. If you don't want to, that's okay. Just follow along. So, earthworms are animals and belong to the kingdom Animalia. Its phylum, remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, that's how we classify animals, is called Annelida. Kind of a nice name, right? The scientific name, its genus, is Lumbricus, and its species is Terrestris. So remember, we capitalize genus, lowercase the species. Common names, well, we mostly call it an earthworm, but I know a lot of people also call them night crawlers. Sure, there's other words too. Okay, so these worms are segmented worms, and you can see the lines around the worm when you look at them. I hope you tried to do activity 2, or at least thinking about a worm that you have observed. Earthworms are segmented worms called annelids, which means little rings. Earthworms may have as many as 100 segments. On each segment are small bristle-like structures called setae. There are 2 pairs on each segment, but it doesn't include the very first or the very last segment of the worm. So again, these are like little hairs called setae. These structures help the worm to move and hold on to soil. Earthworm body systems. Describe how an earthworm uses its special body parts to move. Well, it has 2 sets of muscles. So it has some longitudinal muscles and it has some circular muscles that go around its body. So it uses these muscles to help it move forward through the soil. Longitudinal and circular muscles. 2 sets. Okay. Body systems. What does an earthworm eat? Well, it eats lots of organic material. So, what kind of organic material can you think of? Like leaves, decaying materials, things like that. If you look for some videos on YouTube, you can find earthworms pulling leaves down into their burrows to ingest them. What's the function of the crop? Well, remember, we're talking about the digestive system here. So it's kind of like it almost has 2 stomachs. So the crop stores the food first, and then the gizzard is the next organ, and it grinds up the food. So just kind of like a bird, like a chicken, they also have crops and gizzards. What are castings? Well, castings are basically worm poop or worm waste. And this is what we would call like compost materials. Basically, it's soil. So it's you know their worm waste, their worm poop. So we have a worm box in our classroom, and we would put vegetable peelings or apple cores in it, whatever we had on hand, and they would ingest it and turn it into soil. And that soil is the best thing you can plant seeds in, I promise. Okay, circulatory system. Describe the heart-like structures of an earthworm. Well, it has 5 aortic arches. My pen's not working here. AORTIC, arches. So earthworms have lots of love, right? Because they have 5 little hearts, and I'll show you a picture of those in a few minutes. Respiratory system. How do earthworms breathe? Well, they breathe through their skin. They do not have lungs. So it's important that they stay moist or have a moisture balance so they don't dry out. If they dry out, they can't breathe. But if they're submerged in water, they'll drown and they can't breathe either. Nervous system. What stimuli do earthworms respond to? So remember, a stimulus could be like, I drop a book, and then your response would be like, you jump because you're surprised. But they respond to like heat, temperature, they respond to sunlight. They respond to vibrations. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of those like Dirty Job episodes on Discovery Channel where they collect worms out of the ground, and so they can use vibrations to get them to come out, or even like electricity. I think they will shock the worms to come up out of the ground. And lastly, the reproductive system. Why is an earthworm considered to be a hermaphrodite? Well, they both have, or each worm has both male and female reproductive structures. So they have sperm and eggs that they can make, each worm does. And so what happens when worms reproduce? They exchange sperm with another worm. They don't exchange eggs, so they exchange sperm, and then the sperm will fertilize the eggs in the worm. And when the eggs are fertilized, they lay them in this little cocoon. So, we talked about, well, maybe we haven't yet. We will talk about it, I guess. Um, they have this thing that looks like a Band-Aid that goes around them, right? And I know you've seen that before. So if this is the head of the worm, or the anterior, this thing, this is the clitellum, and it secretes a cocoon, and so then it kind of wiggles out of the cocoon and it leaves it behind in the soil, and that's where the eggs are, and then the worms will hatch eventually. But the two worms will exchange sperm, fertilize the eggs will be laid in this cocoon and then left in the soil behind. If you want to check out some videos on YouTube about worm reproduction, then it's weird, but it's kind of interesting, really. Okay, so that's these notes. I do want to show you the diagrams though, so let me see if I can hop over here to my diagrams. Let's do the exterior anatomy first. Okay, so I think the easiest way to tell the anterior from the posterior, or the head from the anus, is to look for the clitellum. Oh, let's label. Here's the clitellum that makes the cocoon. This is the head. And we'll say, remember, that's the anterior. Okay, so this is the anus, and tail end, or the posterior. Okay, this is the top of the worm, or the back, so we'll call this the dorsal. These are those directions we talked about last week in our previous work. The stomach side, since we're doing these directions, these body planes and directions, this is the ventral side. Okay, we are pointing in this one to, it looks like, different segments. And on each segment are those bristle-like hairs that we talked about, called the setae. I guess they don't call this the head, they call it the mouth in the word bank. So, mouth, anus, clitellum, setae, segment. I think we've got it all. Okay. Let's continue. Let's look at the digestive tract. I think that's kind of interesting. We just talked about it. So, again, we have the mouth here. But besides it just being the mouth, and it's not listed down at the bottom, but a worm actually has these little teeny lips here, and they have this like overhang, and that's called a prostonium. And it just kind of helps it, to bring food into its mouth. It doesn't have hands, so it's got these little worm lips, this prostonium. Okay, and then the next part is the pharynx, and it helps to swallow the food, and it goes into the esophagus. And the esophagus is the long tube that leads to the first stomach-like structure that stores the food, is the crop. And I always think like we store crops in like a silo, so we're storing food in the crop. And then the next, you can see, it has kind of like these little teethy-like structures. This is the gizzard, and the gizzard grinds the food. Okay, so then when the food is ground up, it goes into this intestine. And the intestine, just like for us, is where a lot of the nutrients from food is absorbed. So it's actually getting its nutrition from the absorption here. And then anything that's not absorbed, the waste, exits through the anus. All right, so that's the digestive system. Let's do our last one here, the circulatory system. So just body directions here is why we have the mouth and the anus. I'm going to do anterior and posterior here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the hearts or the aortic arches. The hearts. And then they have blood vessels. So they have a dorsal blood vessel on top. That's why these directions are important. And then they have a ventral blood vessel on the bottom. They also will have a ventral and dorsal nerve cord that helps coordinate movement of the worm. And if you were dissecting a worm, you would see that it's like a white string almost that runs the length of the body. And I'm not making it mandatory that you watch any dissection videos on YouTube, but I think it would be great if you're interested to see what the inside of a worm looks like. I mean, maybe you've been fishing and you've seen the guts kind of squish out of the worm, but when you open up the worm carefully and you can see the muscles and the organs and these very delicate blood vessels and nerve cords, it's really kind of fascinating. So these are worm notes, and I hope that was helpful for you, and you're ready to do your post quiz, and you learned all kinds of new things about worms. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you soon. I hope